Jeremy, thank you for coming back to the Sherborne today and giving us the opportunity to understand more about your practice. Turning the Tide explores your long-standing interest in deep time geology and how landscape is shaped by the forces of nature. It's been a privilege for Dorset Visual Arts to have the opportunity to work with you to present and curate this body of work, which examines and explores various locations around the coast of southern England. I wanted to start off by asking you, when were you first drawn to the coast and why?
Well, first of all, Paul, it's great to be back at the Sherborne. Wonderful to be participating in this exhibition with Dorset Visual Arts. It's a great honour. Wow, that's an interesting question. I gave my wife, Veronica Falco, a small blue abstract painting of Swanage Bay last year for her birthday. I painted that in 1972, so I would have been 15 years old, so 5 decades ago, so quite a while. So for many decades I've been exploring our coastline. I'm particularly interested in landscapes all over the world, but I'm always drawn back to the coastlines of England, particularly Cornwall, Devon, Sussex, the Lake District, and most importantly Dorset, which is really my baseline for the work that I make.
And is there a reason why that is your baseline? Was there something in your childhood or?
Yeah, I grew up in Watford, and my grandmother lived in Swanage. So my mum and dad would leave me with her in the summers in the early 60s when I was a small boy. And we would walk the coast constantly. And I think even today I'm really just that 5-year-old boy still in awe of the coast and the light.
Wow, and that continues. So what does it mean to you then after so many years of exploring and painting? You know, how do you feel now about it? Like you say, you're still in that time really?
How do I feel about it? I don't know, travellers, tourists, day trippers today are drawn to the coast for many different reasons. Perhaps it's our imminent environmental collapse, or maybe they just want to escape the mainstream of modern life. For me, I come back to the coast and want to continue to paint it because it's such an important subject in the 21st century. Yeah.
I noticed in your watching your Pillars of Light film, you talk about those really difficult locations. I think you saying that the geology there is more interesting as well. So you seem to really want to get into those awkward places and prize them apart.
Yeah.
Your practice.
Well, I see the world as a book of time, and to understand it properly, I need to explore other places in the world. The Dorset coast is 200 million years old, but I've worked in Brazil. I painted a tiny archipelago 300 miles off the northeast coast of Brazil that was formed when the tectonic plates of Africa, South America were pulling apart, creating volcanic eruptions in what's known as the Meso-Atlantic range. So that archipelago is 100 million years old. If I'm turning more pages in the book of time, you might think about Cornwall, which is 200, nearly 400 million years old actually. And if I think about the Lake District, it was carved from extinct volcanoes 450 million years ago. So tried to understand these different landscapes. I'm turning these pages constantly.
And how did you find it? You talked about Dorset as being a sort of like a baseline, and we're surrounded by, well, not just Dorset in this exhibition, but a lot of places in the southern coast of England. How do you find it when you move away from Dorset and those faraway places? Does it make you think differently about that baseline?
No, it just makes me want to return to it, actually. I'm drawn back to the English coastline to find fresh sources of inspiration. And that's what draws me back.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your interest in when you came here a few weeks ago and you spoke to the volunteers here, which they all found was absolutely fascinating and really worthwhile. One of the things you mentioned was about previous interest years ago, working with industrial heritage. Mm-hmm. And what really struck me was about the difference between that as subject matter compared to what we're surrounded by now here, which I would think of as more sort of in the romantic tradition, something that's bucolic, it's about natural forces. So can I just ask you a bit about your interest in industrial subject matter and something that's more natural, and the differences or similarities between those two subjects?
Well, as an art student, I was at Newcastle University, so that was the late 70s, and my subject matter at that time was the imminent collapse of our industrial society. I was painting shipyards, coal mines, the subjects that were surrounding me in the northeast. In fact, recently I went to an exhibition in Newcastle. It focused on Turner's painting of the Fighting Temeraire. It was called Art, Industry and Nostalgia. And I'm sure you recall the painting. There are two small tugs, steamships, pulling the Temeraire. So you've got a flagship of Nelson's navy, which is sail disappearing, and the two small tugs, the future, steam. So that continuing saga and story of the industry of the UK was my focal point at that time. Now, when I left art school, I had a wonderful opportunity to work as an artist in industry at Yorkshire Arts. When I left there, I was painting at Parsons turbine manufacturers. I'd returned to Newcastle, and then had a year working as a chain man on the Kielder Dam. That was built, it was an EU-funded project, built to supply water to the industry in the northeast. But by the time I was working on the dam, as I just mentioned, the industry was in decline. I mean, today, Kielder is a boating lake. So, watching those changes and then moving to the Royal College of Art in London, my subject matter was then industrial production lines. So I was spending a lot of time at Renault in France, in Flaine, Fiat in Turin, British Leyland in Birmingham, focusing on that industrial subject matter. So it's similar to the futurists and suprematists in terms of trying to understand how technology was influencing our culture. But my interest and focus changed. And after time, I became more interested in the geology of landscape, and as you said, how it's shaped by the forces of nature. Today, that interest in industry still presents itself in the paintings. You'll find in some of my paintings, think of them like characters in a story. You might see a tin mine chimney or a lighthouse. That remaining industrial architecture, that still finds a place in the work that I'm making.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask a little bit more about how intrepid I feel you are in your practice and process. So I've been really interested in that link between the shift in subject matter and how that sort of came about, but also having visited you in your studio last summer, seeing you taking chisels to your work and blow torches, and so you're working with a subject matter that, as I said, we sort of think of as romantic or maybe sensitive, a place that we go, like you said as well earlier, that we visit to enjoy, and here you are attacking your work you employ other methods as well to explore. So it's not that you're just being inspired, that you're researching, you're mining for clues, you're flying over the landscape, you're paddling around it. Where does that come from? Why is that important to you?
Well, to really understand the landscape, you've got to see it from multiple perspectives. So, I'm very keen to kayak along the coast, walk it, occasionally have the opportunity to fly over it in a Cessna, a high-wing Cessna, because then you can take the doors off, get a really good look at the landscape.
That is intrepid.
Well, I used to ride a motorbike, so it's the equivalent. It's the equivalent of that. But to really understand the landscape, it's not just about that plein air experience, that direct physical engagement, but it's also about turning the tide, which is the title of the exhibition at the Sherborne. Finding how we can see the landscape differently today. By that I mean exploring it through satellite imagery. In fact, that's a big part of the large mural that's on display here, the 11-metre mural in the stairwell atrium, which has a lot of references to LiDAR data. So map making today is, or a lot of map making, the cartography, contemporary cartography, is about firing pulses of laser at the landscape and making models of contour elevations. So it's those kinds of technologies that interest me, that kind of research. We have an opportunity today to see the landscape in many different ways. So when you came to my studio and I was busy planing and abrading the surface of my paintings, that has to do with trying to emulate the effects of weather on the landscape, trying to imbue the panels with that notion of erosion, geological change, trying to instill that in a picture. It's a difficult thing to do. So I like to spend time at shipyards. Whenever I'm traveling, if I can go to a shipyard, rather than see a famous cathedral or museum, I'd much rather find a local shipyard. And one I spend time in is Cobb Quay in Poole. I love to go there and watch the shipwrights at work, because they're not conscious about the drills, sanders and fillers and resins they're using on the hulls of their ships. They've got to get a job done. And watching them at work is a practice that I take back to my studio.
I think that's a really important point, and something that really struck me, that, as I say, you've taken something that, as I say, we maybe view through that prism of distance and tourism, and we find beautiful, and actually you're getting under the skin of it in your research, your observation. It also reminds me of the quote from Chuck Close.
Yeah.
About just getting on with it.
Well,
not waiting for inspiration.
Yeah, I've taught at many art schools over the years, and I worked at a wonderful art school in Brooklyn for 8 years, Pratt Institute of Art and Design. And in fact, I was thinking about that recently because I've been to see a play called View from the Bridge by Arthur Miller. And he saw a man wandering around with an iron rod in his hand in a thunderstorm as a metaphor for inspiration, which I thought was very dramatic. And because that play takes place in an area underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, it reminded me of my time in Brooklyn, where I taught, and which was very, very near there. And a number of the students that I taught went on to be artist assistants. And living in New York, I had the opportunity to visit many artist studios over the years. And one of them was Chuck Close's. I was invited there by a mutual friend. And I remember Close saying at the time, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. And I admire that work ethic. Let's not forget, he spent the last almost 40 years of his life in a wheelchair. So, yeah.
It's a good notion, isn't it? Something important. A couple of other things I just wanted to cover then as we come towards the end is about, we touched on your use of technology. So again, I was really intrigued in maybe sort of thinking of you, the idea of thinking of you as a painter, but actually much more than that, and the way that you've brought those different materials in. And I think it just links in with that idea of how intrepid you are in your approach. I know that the 3D relief map has been pored over by visitors here over the summer, and I really like the way that people have used it to see where they are in the world and not just identify locations, but have thought about their engagement with those locations and gone back to the 2D works as well. And of course, out in the atrium, we have this 11-metre mural that you've produced, this layers again of deep time here in the heart of the building. In one of the rooms here as well, we also have your intaglio prints, a series of those works. So we've got these variety of approaches. There's a real richness to what you've presented. So you're always moving on. You're always trying different things. Is there anything that you want to do next with your technical processes?
Well, as you know, research is integral to the practice, the studio practice. And you mentioned the mural. That notion, seeing that wall 18 months ago was a gift for me, because I just knew it had to be about descending through time, or ascending, depending on whether you're walking up or down the stairwell. And that idea of walking a walk through time with that very large monoprint, I just found such an interesting challenge, because over time, technology has enabled us not only to look at the landscape differently, but also in our creative practice to try new things. Whether it's Vermeer using a camera obscura, today additive and subtractive technologies. In fact, it was a subtractive technology that was instrumental in the production of the map, which I see as a legend for visitors to the exhibition. But by that I mean they can look at a very realistic God's eye view of the Dorset coast, pick a location they may be familiar with, and then connect that with a work hanging on the wall that might be more abstract in nature, so maybe not immediately recognizable. But that's milled from satellite data. And then it was hand painted by two model makers who work at the Games Workshop in Bath from a giant photo mosaic of the landscape taken by a satellite on a particular day. So you're capturing something that I want to share with other people. So if we think about the intaglio monoprints that are hanging in the purple room, those are utilizing everything from laser cut wood blocks to photo etched steel plates. So yeah, I'm excited about how new technologies are giving us new and interesting ways to work, but also new and interesting ways to look at the world.
And it's been fascinating to see those responses by visitors to the variety of the works in the show, the techniques that you've employed, helping them understand about different artistic processes. And like you say, the map itself is like the most brilliant of legends, a key to engagement with different aspects of the exhibition. It's as I say, it's been fascinating to see people's responses to it. So the last couple of questions I have for you, Jeremy, were firstly about, you've touched a little bit on influence and inspiration and not just artists. So could you just tell us a little bit about people who have inspired you over the years?
I mean, there are many explorers, scholars, philosophers, architects, directors, poets and painters. But I think probably my teachers. And the first teacher that I remember encouraging me to draw and paint was a lady called Miss Francis, who was my art teacher at Watford Central Primary School. And then at secondary school, I went to a military boarding school. It was a Captain Peter Smith who encouraged, in fact, he encouraged me and a very close friend of mine, another painter, Peter Lawrence, to go to evening life classes. There were no life models in our school. And I remember him giving us the money to catch a bus down to the local education authority in Dover and attend life drawing classes. So that was a very important moment. And teachers at art school, Bill Varley and Kenneth Roundtree at Newcastle, John Golding and Peter de Francia, a staunch socialist at the Royal College of Art. So obviously those teachers are really vital and important, which is why I've always felt education is vital as an artist evolves, which is why I've spent 30 years of my life teaching alongside my practice, making some contribution. But if we're talking about specific people who've inspired or I admire, I guess if I was looking at individuals, it might be a Chinese writer called Lao She, a poet, Louis MacNeice, Patricia Highsmith, I enjoy very much, a musician, there are so many musicians, film director Sidney Lumet. There are many. The painters, we could talk for an hour.
That's another interview.
Another day, another chat, another day, Paul.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeremy. That's been absolutely fascinating to hear about those, dig a little deeper into your process and practice. The last thing I will ask you is, what's next?
What's next? Well, Artists in Purbeck, a wonderful exhibition at the Russell Coates Museum that's going to be running through the rest of 24 and into 25. And then a great project that Tim Craven's organised. I know you're part of that project too, which is
Every Step of the Way.
Every Step of the Way, which will be at the Ark in Winchester. That's looking at many artists who've been invited to focus on specific parts of Sussex. So that's exciting. That's 25 again. And then beyond that, in 2026, I'll be exhibiting Strata at the Southampton City Museum and Art Gallery, which is really the art room display at the Sherborne, is a taster, a few works from that series, which will be 100 paintings looking at the Dorset coast.
Well, look forward to seeing those. And thank you very much again, Jeremy.
You're welcome, Paul. Thank you.